Hello and welcome to today's virtual coffee, lunch, and learn. We're very excited to be here today. As always, our mission is to be a welcoming tech community that allows room for growth and mentorship at all levels and provides opportunities for learning, leadership, and contribution for everyone. And in today's Lunch and Learn, we have Q here talking today, who's going to be sharing about the correlations between fighting and learning how to code. And we couldn't be more excited to hear how this is developing. So welcome here today with us, Q. Would you like us to hold our questions to the end, or can we ask them throughout?
Please ask them throughout. And I'm going to be a little rough because this is the second try at this. I'm still
You did a great job last time.
I took some notes. To not be didactic, I'm going to open up with the story, just where I'm at and how they kind of relate in the same thing. My experiences, again, are overgeneralized to fit within, I believe, 20 minutes of a conversation top. But I'll do my best. So please forgive me if some things are like, why is he, making that analogy? I'm trying to figure this out.
You got this.
Okay. Don't know if I should use the slides. I might not.
Yeah,
So
you should.
I forgot how do you zoom though? Is it there's like a button on the top? Or is it
There is a okay, so right in the middle, there should be a green button that says share screen.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's okay. And it's like different in everything that you use. So it's totally okay if it doesn't, not something that you are familiar with.
Okay. I think
we got it though. All right, we see it. And now then go ahead and hit that. I think it's a share button. There should be a way to do presenter mode.
Slideshow.
Okay.
Slideshow. Where is slideshow?
Right there. You had it. You had it. Right next to share on the right, top right.
Bingo. Gotcha. Okay.
Nice. Thank you.
All right. And I'll open up with this. So my story goes back a couple of years. I'm not very young anymore. And even when I started all this, there are many reasons why I kind of got into learning different sets of skills. I get very involved in learning things, and I have a hard time kind of like, what's the word? Well, I'll go back to this. So learning is very important for me, like fundamentals, things like that. It helps me cope with certain problems. In this case, when a couple years ago, I was dealing with PTSD, my hands would shake, and now they're stable. After many years of swimming to kind of get my breathing rates down, it helped kind of just get me into the mode of like running. And then after that, my breathing rates got longer. And overall, I started developing just a set skill of kind of being sort of a triathlon athlete. Now, this is going way back. What that did to me is create a base foundation of intrigue of like, okay, what can I do next? Like now that I'm doing this, I want to understand how to use my ability to go 3 hours, 2 hours running, swimming, all that into something else. And I picked up the idea of learning how to just do some basic martial arts. And it started from like learning a very basic curve of martial arts to like then preparing for like my first amateur fight. And this is a very long arc. And why this parallels to coding. Now, it's very similar in how I kind of went through an arc of learning something very weird and obscure. I got involved with film editing. I started a small business. From there, I kind of thought, hey, these scripts kind of suck that you're using. Like, there's got to be something better. Looking at Blender, looking at Python, peeking at code, and being like, oh, wow, I can manipulate this. Then starting to learn how to do a basic WordPress. And then from the WordPress, working myself into wanting to learn why these things run and how they can be worked with. And now the arc is going into learning different functions, learning different, design stuff, like learning things of structures that put together, getting into full stack development. as I keep progressing, it's very much the way I kind of learned how to fight. Also, I'm learning to finally get ready for that actual fight called, the tech interview. And I had my first tech interview. So these small wins on that story arc are doable. For me, they are painful though, because as I go through them, there are many things that have come up. When I started, I guess, getting more into like workouts, being a runner, and then eventually getting MMA. At some point, I had a very hard fallback on. A family member, a child I raised, died, and that kind of cemented a couple of things. Where, and this is a hard topic, but going back to coding, there's something you kind of have to choose to do. When things happen, you have to make a choice of why and what is your purpose and what are you putting your efforts in. I kind of, instead of like climbing up and being scared and falling back to things, I pushed ahead with trying to understand how to grow through these pains. And now I'm going to break into this slideshow just to kind of go over some of that really quickly. Loved him to death. And, he was one of the main focuses why I kept pushing. Now, going on forward, in my family currently, there are a couple of kids that are now adults as well, and I'm trying to get them to code along with me, and I'm trying to get them ready also for their first career. In the same manner, I took training and fighting and showing the rest of them, I'm doing the same thing with why I code. My arc kind of falls here within early 2012, 2013, pushing through all this stuff. I got involved with training, and to the point where I started getting involved with Olympic athletes, like pro fighters, being invited to other gyms, and being like kind of part of a community of known kind of like trainers and fighters and people that want to take it seriously to the next step. It kind of reflects also where I'm coding and how I'm meeting other developers on my journey to like getting to the point where we're talking about projects, we're talking about jobs, we're talking about like career paths beyond just like a regular desk job. I talked about some of these things, the timeline stuff, so I'll skip this part. But at the end of the day, when I picked up some of these skill sets, I had to have a concept of why I'm doing this. Like, what is my point? What is my reason? And if I get lost, who and what do I hold on to keep me going? And a lot of it has very deep parallels. The bootcamp I'm in might not be the sense like General Assembly, may not be like, I forget what Trinity, whatever that bootcamp is, something that costs like thousands of dollars. But the reason why I've stuck with it and the reason why it has been instrumental is because of the community part. Same thing within gyms. There are many places you can go, they'll treat you really roughly, poorly, and they won't want to develop you. They'll kind of like throw you aside if you don't, have what they think is enough. Sort of like when you see General Assembly or something like that, take your money and then kind of throw you to the side and you're like, whatever, it's your problem. Places like that exist, but for me at least, the thing that I stuck to was learning from people that are open to growing, that are open to sharing. And that, to me, helped me tremendously really pick up speed on training. And that also opened up doors to great many fighters that, I wouldn't have connected otherwise. Like athletes that were doing like really crazy things when they were younger, but under the tutelage of a community that wanted to encourage this. And boot camps are kind of a dime a dozen, but for me, at least the one I'm in, has made that connection of how I trained before. And touching on this, the hardest thing was like finding coaches and people that actually wanted to work with you and believe in. Same thing as in like developers or people who are not hard-nosed about like taking you on or even talking to you. In the tech community now, things are inclusive and diverse and open to, shifting career paths for many. But I know going back a couple of years, people would talk about how hard it was breaking tech. The issues of misogyny, the issues of sort of feeling outcast, the barriers of language, the barriers of economy. And in a way, it might not seem like that too, but training also is kind of like that. Certain places will take you in, certain places are okay. and some places are harder. And going through all this, I don't want to, what's the word, get stuck in a loop here. I'm going to move on with this one. I learned that if I was able to hang in there, work with people who are open to training and learning from each other, a lot can happen. And in tech, I'm seeing the kind of parallels here again of people who might not know a lot, but are willing to kind of ingrain. And as a self-taught developer, it is kind of wonderful seeing people also on my levels, my peers wanting to learn, seeing people on a higher level also who went through the same thing, wanting to like ingrain and help move along whatever crowds of people who are learning. That essence, sort of the community building part, has been, I think, always the pinnacle of how I keep growing. And at the end of the day, if I see that, that is sort of what makes me believe that it is possible, at least beyond the self-belief of what I'm doing. Here's a picture of one of the family members. She's older now, but I raised about 8 nieces and nephews as like a legal guardian for a couple of years. We were working with her on just form and fighting. And going back to all the little wins that add up, this might not seem relevant in what I'm showing, but if you take down a couple of things, like what I learned was Muay Thai, judo, boxing, BJJ, grappling, and then take those things and I'll parallel them with knowing Node.js, knowing databases, understanding how networking works, knowing what the front end stuff does, React, CSS. And I'll parallel this way. Muay Thai is fancy boxing, just like CSS versus React or CSS versus Sass is fancy like design, very responsive, very quick. Judo kind of was like, for me, when I was learning Node.js, kind of similar in my mind, very hard nosed on some things. Foundations have to be a certain way or else it won't work. But once it does, everything's beautiful. When you have, no errors on your server side, it is the same thing as when you finally can throw someone over your hip. But it's a very formulaic thing. So there's not a lot of like space to, do other things. So in my head, when I'm learning, I went through the same concept of like, okay, this is what that looked like. Middleware was learning how to take all that stuff together, like BJJ, and holding on to it and making it work. Being a full stack developer, in essence, putting all this stuff together, all these bits and chunks that you learn, for me, was sort of like being an MMA fighter, getting ready for the actual first web application, for the first thing you finally put up. And sorry, I'm losing the Luo track here. I'll close this. Moving on. So one of the things I realized was pattern recognition is important. Finding best practices was a thing I did that really helped me learn. Working with other developers kind of was the same thing as like sparring all the time with like peers, higher level function peers. And kind of like being given feedback was sort of like very similar in a way what a good coach would do, or developer. When they see your code, your form is lacking, and they kind of like go over with you, like work on this. What about this thing? And learning is a very universal concept, but it's hard if you at first go into a thing without any background and then you're kind of lost. I can imagine like other people just starting, and this is me like trying to think about me only a couple months ago, being completely spun around about how and what these things are. Now, a lot of people may never fight, may never, take a thing seriously to the point, and that's okay. You may dabble, you may learn, but the real beauty about all this is that you can take some of this stuff and put it together in the way you want. I went the route of ingraining all the way, learning as much as I can, and I took it to the point where it was like almost a full-time job, which was great. Now, there was a downfall, a little downfall of none of the stuff, all the hits, all the live drilling, all the throwing, none of that really did anything to me particularly, but falling off a ladder actually was the thing that ended everything. So on that arc of a couple of years, I was getting ready for my first fight, and then finally getting through the business stuff, going through the actual particular coaching, hard hitting stuff, and then I kind of couldn't do anything else. And that's sort of like the next few years, and kind of like what we call the lost years. Like, what do you do? So coding, and this is where I'm threading coding now. Coding kind of like started popping up in my head as a thing I can do. That's also like a new journey, new adventure. And this is going back to the previous analogies I was trying to make. Again, I'm a little rough on this, so forgive me. If anyone has questions or wants to bring up thoughts, you're welcome to. So I'll give you an example of what that kind of means. When I'm talking about skill sets and coding and knowing absolutely zero of nothing, I could not type beyond like 10 WPMs. I have damage to both my hands, not from like fighting, but from just carpal tunnel and other things. With muscle development, I started getting better at typing, getting to the point where now I can actually kind of keep up speed. To some people though, 60 WPMs might mean nothing. To some people, running 2 miles might mean nothing. And it might not be anything to someone who does this regularly, like a developer is used to banging out product after product every day. But for someone starting, it's a huge mental block to go from like, can I really do this? Can I type beyond like 10 WPMs and actually code? Can I really run a mile and keep up with people who have been running for like 3? But it's doable. Not impossible, but doable. And it takes little chunks at a time, hours of like practice. And I've been doing this and realizing it's overwhelming at first. If you can hold on and not let go in the same way you grapple with your code, going back to the people that you trust that can help you move along, you can win this kind of particular fight. And everyone has different skill sets. And that's the beauty about what I'm seeing as people keep learning, they're trying to get their first entry job, or people who have already coded for years and decades are still grappling with that same refactoring issues. It's sort of, in its way, very elegant and wonderful, but it will always be a challenge, and it will always be a hard thing to kind of like get into it and hold on. I think I'm at the end. I know it wasn't as long, but there's a couple of things I just want to hit off with the lesson of like what I've learned and how I feel about it. All this stuff you do can have meaning, and they're very good skill sets, like knowing how to throw a punch, knowing how to throw a person over, knowing how to manipulate, your code or a joint on someone's hand. But it goes out the door the day you actually go for an interview. The real drill that you practice, like leak code, all that stuff, sometimes doesn't matter. Like, I was surprised in my last tech interview, they did not ask anything really technical except for one thing, and that one thing I was actually kind of okay at because I had help from this community on touching that subject, data structure and algorithms. And I found that amazing because the same way I learned how to fight, not everything you learn in every rigid form is useful, but sometimes the neat little tricks or the neat little shortcuts that someone's been doing for a while shows you and points you out. The best analogies that kind of just get the job done to make it click. And that's how I felt. I'm at about this tech interview. Like, I could know a million things for this fight, but it might just be that one throw that that's all I needed. But because like I just had fun, I learned it without the stress, it became like a natural thing when it got thrown at me. Anyway, I'm gonna end this with the same thing my community taught me, to just like take care of yourself, because like your body is very fragile, even though you feel great. Some people can bang out 9-12 hours a day coding along. I can't do that. My hands are already kind of like to the point where they're broken down, but I'm still learning. And I will say, just take care of yourself overall. Make this time and space for mental clarity and physical, joy. I think that is it. Okay, now I'm getting out of the screen.
Thanks so much, Q, for this presentation. I think it's really great and a lot of really great reminders there. And I know too, like there's different ways to code, right? Like the more we grow in technology, the more advancements are available for people who have mobility issues. So whether that's like controlling your screen with eye movement or using speech to text to code, there are a lot of different technologies that are coming out with awareness for those type of mobility issues. And I really, really love seeing all of those things come out. But I also very much appreciate you sharing what you have today. If there are any questions right now, feel free to unmute and come up into the conversation. If not, I can ask you some questions on everyone's behalf because I think there's great information here to continue to be learned. Go ahead, Kirk.
Hello. I guess this is my maybe second time hearing a talk, this or like a version of this talk. And I really like it, and it feels really inspiring, and it feels really like validating, I think, no matter what stage of the coding journey you're on. But I kind of want to talk a little bit about your, you described like a variety of different sports disciplines, which I didn't know before, that like you had tried and like done all these things. And it seems like you got a lot of benefit from them. So I was wondering, after all your experiences, would you recommend these types of activities to folks? And if so, like between the judo, the BJJ, there's like, what is there like a tier list? Like, would you say like, hey, maybe like try this or start with this, or like maybe like this is more advanced and you should wait? What do you think?
I think the most important thing would be wherever you go, if the community there is great in the sense of inviting and willing to teach, stick with that community and learn under them and see what you can bridge from. Just kind of like all of these things I learned were very good and important, but it was kind of like learning different languages almost in order to get to what I wanted to accomplish. I picked up a little bit of this and that, and every one of them isn't hard to learn once you start clicking them together, but on their own, they have their own parameters and they have their own skill sets. For example, like if you're in Philadelphia, there is a Muay Thai gym that's very much making hours for the trans community, for women. And that's one gym I'd recommend to people in the Northeast, if they're around there, to train under. If they were doing like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there's many schools and they're plentiful. It depends where you're at, but definitely find a community that is willing to teach and not be hard-nosed about teaching you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, go ahead, Kirk.
No, I was just saying that actually I like that advice a lot. It probably doesn't, if the space is comfortable for me, I'll probably get something good out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like having a comfortable space. And I think the more comfortable spaces you are, the more it enriches what you're doing. And so, like for me, well, we've got COVID in my house, and prior to COVID, we were on vacation for a week. So, being part of a gym is a big part of my daily routine. And I haven't been there for a couple of weeks because I haven't been able to. And I can say it's been much harder to maintain the cadence of all of things I was doing without that. So, in the aspects of your life, and I've been listening to this book, I keep mentioning it and keep forgetting what it is called. So, I'm going to look again for what it is called. It is Designing Your Life, How to Build a Well-Lived, Joyful Life. But as I was listening to it this morning when I was walking, they were talking about these different aspects of your life. So like doing the things that you love. And now I'm going to forget every single one of them. You want to be able to do the things you love, things that you're invested in, things that are part of your work, things that are a part of everyday activities. Those are not 4 categories, but go back and listen to the book and do a better job of what I'm saying now. But the point is, like, each of the different pieces of your life influence how effective you are in all of the pieces of your life. And so if there's something that's off, if there's something that's unbalanced, then finding a way to find that balance is going to enrich every single part of your life. And I definitely feel that's true, especially this past week where there's not been a lot of balance in my life because we're stuck in the house with COVID. It can be really important or allow you to kind of reflect on, okay, what is the importance of this aspect of my life? And how does that influence the other parts? So Q, I especially appreciate that perspective of providing more insight into the rest of our lives by doing things that we find fulfilling. Sorry, I was just checking the chat and also eating chocolate. Go ahead, Jörn.
Hey, and thanks for the talk. I missed a little bit in the beginning, so I hope you haven't said that before. But what about team? Like the aspect of working in a team when you code, and the that you did all the fighting sports where you and being in all of these communities. Does it help? Does it, well, it probably does help, but like, can you see something like, okay, I'm way better at dealing with criticism and pull requests, for example, than other people, things like this.
Kind of useful. It helps me, I think, on different levels. But it's hard because, and I'll put it this way, the internet and overall online stuff really kind of makes it hard to understand people. I have a hard time understanding people, and I can misinterpret a lot. But I see 3 things when people work together, and I've been working with some people. When you don't know a thing, but you're willing to put in time to kind of spin around it. When you know a thing and you're able to at least kind of like chime in and help move along what's going on, the process of learning. Also, some heavy hitters sometimes come in and they're like the gentle giants of the group, and they're like, okay, here, let's look at this. And that is incredibly amazing to see someone just give a little bit to help you move along. And I've had that also in like programming, stuff like that, just kind of where like I'm like amazed. But coding along and having like pull requests and stuff with people, it is weird depending also on the teams. I'm getting better at understanding the intricacies of team building, but it's still a little foreign to me. Like, but I'm getting like the difference between someone who really is cool and wants to work with you and someone who's passive aggressive and just kind of like, I haven't had that happen, but I've seen it in the wild, and I'm kind of confused because I've seen it also in fighting gyms and other places where some people are like just hitting you for no reason harder than you need to, or pushing you aside for no reason. Not a lot of that also exists, and some of them do, but same thing, like it's your time. Why waste it with like that kind of thing?
Thanks.
Sorry, my Zoom screen keeps coming in and out. Yeah, absolutely. All of those things are incredibly important as we think about how we navigate the space that we spend with our teammates and what that looks like. And I think that, continually it's looking at who's on our team, what their strengths and their weaknesses are. And in that, with that correlation to fighting, we're all going to have different strengths and weaknesses, right? And so finding how we can train together, how we can complement each other's strengths, or how we can fill in for the weaknesses can be a really great approach to finding a way to make our team work best together. Does anybody else have some insight into how they prepare with their teams to be most effective? Nobody. Going on. Going to Kirk. Sold.
Yeah, something I found which has been pretty good is I've had teams where we will do I don't know, sort of a like there's a distinct check-in time, which is before we get into, I don't know, just like a normalizing time, a time where people are empowered to say what is going on with them, and it doesn't have to be good things, right? Which I think is something that happens a lot, where, you know, like you're encouraged to check in, but it's like not really, like you're not really supposed to say anything particularly disruptive. But you know, if you're on a team where it's like, no, you should say, like, you don't have to, like, obviously not being forced to give details, but if you're like, today's not great, like I'm not high energy today, it's not, you know, going well, and then just having the team sort of respond to that in a healthy way, I think it's good, or it has been good, and that feel like after that, you know, just like being heard and sort of like being acknowledged and knowing that no one is expecting me to be 1000% makes it a lot easier to actually like think about work.
Yeah, I like that. Creating a psychologically safe space is incredibly important, and allowing for productivity, for growth, and that kind of thing. And I think, especially when we're talking about those things, I just want to refer back to, we have a podcast episode with Tom Cudd. I can't remember what season that is. I want to say it's season 1 or 2 of the Virtual Coffee podcast. And then just this week, we released it. We released David Alpert's episode of the podcast, where I don't know if we ever specifically mentioned psychological safety, but we talk a lot about acknowledging people where they're at, helping people, empathy, that kind of thing. And this is in season 6 of the podcast. If you're listening on YouTube and you want to find it, this is a great place to kind of understand how we can all work together in a way that makes it feel useful to us. So we don't have any questions in the chat right now for Q, but does anybody else have questions that they'd like to bring to the conversation about what Q is talking about today? I think this idea of, you know, there's a progression. You're not going to be an expert from day one. It takes time to move into and grow into this point in your career where you're going to feel strong with it. Q, do you feel that there were any like very meaningful moments where you thought, okay, now I'm at this point and this is a turning point in my career, whether that's for tech or whether that's in fighting?
I think I'll parallel the same feeling I had when Heroku didn't like vomit back angry response when I tried to launch my first backend piece of the puzzle on my app. And then that feeling was sort of like the first actual feeling of like I'm at some weird, really obscure tournament thing, and everyone's running circles around me, but like at the end of the day, third round, I finally actually pulled a win. It may not seem like much, but like having on the back end something not yell at you feels amazing for the first time. And then having from there on other developers kind of be like, oh, you did a thing. That's nice. It does a thing. That feels huge instead of like feeling lost all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely those moments where you feel like you can track your progress. And I think, especially for early career developers, that can be incredibly important because sometimes it feels like you're moving so slowly, or you're looking at other people around you and like, why are they moving so quickly? And why am I not? But I think if we do keep track of those small growth moments, if we see where we were last week or the week or month before, it can help us to do a better job of evaluating where we are today. Wow, you might not feel like you're doing a great job, but you've grown so much since the last time you tracked any metrics. And I feel like metrics can feel like a gross word or something difficult to think about, but finding some way to track what you're doing can be really useful in keeping you motivated as you go forward. And so this kind of leads to my next question, Q. When you're thinking about when you find yourself in those moments of like, I'm not doing as well as I want to be doing, or like I've lost the last so many fights and I hoped that I would have won one of them. Like, how do you deal with the disappointment of losing or not making the progress that you expected and then push yourself forward?
So I'm learning what refactoring your code looks like and kind of what senior devs kind of do and how they write out their stuff. After a couple of failures of spinning in my wheels, same thing, like when you're learning at first, you're like, don't spend 50 hours on a problem, go find some solutions. And if you can't find a solution, if you're getting yelled at by Stack Overflow or some weird coach, move on, like find someone who can break it down for you. In this case, pair program. For me, it was a lot of like wasted effort, I realized, with certain techniques, certain training. And then I started thinking and actually reading a little more on sports training, other things, talking to other types of fighters and seeing what their routines look like refactoring what my focus should be and how the steps look like compared to others. And the comparison part has helped a bit. That I think that is kind of like the nugget of info a lot of people forget. If you're lost, compare and contrast. And if it doesn't work, try to understand what the parameters you're dealing with and if they're the same. And if not, what else you can do.
Yeah, I really like that idea, especially the comparing and contrast and thinking about like even what your own journey is. Like look at what you have done a couple of weeks ago and compare that what you could do today. And I think that for most of us, it doesn't matter what level we're on. If we look at what we've done 4 weeks ago, we can always improve upon that. And that's a good thing to recognize and a good thing to acknowledge. Like, look how far I've come in the last week. Progress is important, whether or not somebody else recognizes this or we recognize it ourselves. And sometimes that's what it's going to be. It is okay to recognize yourself, how much progress you've made, and for other people to not recognize that progress. Growth is still growth. It doesn't matter who recognizes it as long as it's there. All right, we've got a couple more minutes left. Are there any other questions, or Q, is there anything that you want to add to all of the things that we talked about today? I think you've done a fantastic job of giving this overview of the parallels, and I'm really glad that you've been able to share this with us today.
There is, weird comparisons I made, and I'm not sure if it came across, but at the end of the day, this is sort of me sharing what I've picked up on in life and sort of like what it kind of looks like to relearn a thing from scratch. Because I think a lot of us have taken on the concept of becoming a developer or learning what coding looks like, but it doesn't always have to be the way we perceive it. There are many roads in tech, just like I'm looking at, there's roads in fighting when I was younger and I was doing the other things that kind of like added to it value wise. Right now I'm looking at cybersecurity stuff because like the friends I have kind of deal with it. I'm learning about, infrastructure, architecture, just because like it's a thing that some people understand more than me. And I'm learning from them, like being open to grasping concepts and how they all fit together is helpful. I mean, for at least a lot of people I know, they want to get a career, but it also helps seeing the scope of like possibilities beyond that. And I know that sounds weird, but like realizing there's such a thing as like DevRel, like I'm like, what? How is that even a thing in tech? Like fighting, like learning that there's like a cross between these things, and you can kind of like train together. It's not one or the other. But, it's weird, but it's cool.
Yeah, I really love those ideas, and I want to apologize because I know I was like squatting. I've got to find my room. Like keeps landing on my head. So if you saw me doing a lot of this, that is what I was doing, was sweating my slides. But I think that there are so many great things that you said in that point, in your points, and that idea of continuing on and thinking about where you're at. All of those things are incredibly important to what you're doing and how you're gauging what your progress is. And I think that finding that, like looking at that entry point and constantly gauging how you've made progress, how you can continue to make progress, what are the points that you're hoping to hit. Sometimes you're not going to hit them, and that's okay. Like it happens to all of us. We all have life, and that all it will change and interfere with what the progress points that we hope that we make, and it doesn't happen all the time. So I love the idea that we're continuing to work on something to find meaning in what we're doing, and to be able to support other people and what's going on as we make our own progress in our journeys. So I'm going to open it up for any last comments or questions that you might have for Q before we close out for the day. Is there anything else you would like to share?
Just really happy people showed up.
Yeah, I think this is great. And I know that there is going to be a number of people that are going to watch the replay on YouTube. So we're very, very happy that you were here to share this with us. And I am very, very lucky because I got to see a version of this on Monday. And I think that this does a nice job of really taking into account the feedback that you received, and to be able to develop this in a way that makes it even stronger than what you had on Monday. So thank you so much for sharing with us today, Q. We're happy to be here as part of the virtual coffee community. If you're interested in finding out more about virtual coffee, you can check us out on virtualcoffee.io. We're very happy to say that we're allowing new members in for with invites from all of our active volunteers, and you can check out all of our lunch and learns available on our virtualcoffee.io or virtualcoffee.io YouTube channel. It's been great having you here with us today, and thank you for listening.